the incredible bloodlust for the sex offender registry, for its very existence, for putting people who supposedly have committed a sex offense on some kind of list. And when I say supposedly, because as I pointed out many times before, there are numbers of people on the list who really are not offenders, and there are people who are not on the list who are offenders. So, unfortunately, having a list has done very little. Um, Detractors of that position, namely people who are pro list, think that there is some evidence, and there have been some studies that seem to suggest that a list is a good thing. There are many more studies which suggest that a list is detrimental to the public that it claims it's going to take uh, heed of and care for. This conversation occurred the other day, basically, and without relaying the entire conversation. And it went like this, we need it because we need to protect people. And I had a conversation with this lady, and I said, well, imagine, for example, that because I'm thinking about this a little bit more. Imagine that you are, I don't know, involved in petty theft. So, giving you a little background here in Virginia, we have a grocery store chain called Giant, and there have been a rash of thefts, not only of cars but of also things like goods, like groceries, things like that. People just grabbing stuff and then pushing the cart out into the parking lot, loading it, and running off. And grocery workers are forbidden to stop these people. Um, by physically impeding them or getting into an altercation with them or something. Although they certainly will track them, they'll monitor it, and if you do it many, many times where they've got the goods on you, they will certainly go and bring you to court. But they really want to have overwhelming evidence. Well, it's gotten so bad that some of these giant department stores have said, we need to close down. So imagine, if you will, I said to this lady, that you have been guilty of this crime and you've been convicted of it, and you've done it many times because they wouldn't go after you otherwise. And so here you are, and you have been convicted of stealing groceries. According to your thought processes on this, what you ought to do is you ought to curb this by having some kind of registry for it, let's say. Let's say that you had that kind of registry for everything, and you have this registry in place, and you go to the grocery store after your conviction, after your jail time, and as soon as you produce a receipt and you get your groceries, you have to drive to the police station or to a neutral arbiter with your receipt in hand, and they go through every item in your bag and they make sure that it matches your receipt perfectly before you're allowed to take them home and actually use those. Well, she said, well, that would be ridiculous. Of course you don't. And besides, it's not as important as a sex offense. I said, well, you may be right on that, but it's certainly more prevalent. It's certainly more damaging. It certainly costs all of us much more in many ways than somebody who actually didn't seek to hurt a child, but was nevertheless convicted anyway. Um, you might suppose you had that kind of a situation. And she said, "Well, I don't like the comparison." Fine, maybe you don't like the comparison. So where would that fit in the hierarchy of crimes and criminality? Where, for example, would your liberty interest be? And what about protecting the Constitution? Is that of value to you? Because if you believe in protecting the Second Amendment or the First Amendment, why not the Fifth or the 14th or the Sixth and the Eighth? At what point in the Fourth Amendment protections, for example, do you think that you shouldn't be monitored by the police merely because they claim that a child might possibly, perhaps, maybe be endangered if they weren't there? Another analogy I use is, let's say, for example, more to the point, on individual liberty, the police are stopping you at checkpoints, or they're stopping you uh, in on the street over here. And let's say the police are on the side of the road and they grab a bunch of tacks or impediments, things that can puncture your tires and hurl them in front of you. And when you all stop and swerve and crash into one another, they run out there and give you a ticket. Oh, well, that would be very unfair. She said, of course, that would be ridiculous. So, but that's what they're doing. They're doing it in a surreptitious way, they're doing it in a sneaky way, but that's what they're doing. That's exactly what they're doing. They are violating and impeding your right as a citizen to conduct your business out in the open and do whatever. And that includes your personal life. That includes privately being in a vulnerable site like a dating or hookup site where police have absolutely no business being there unless there's a violation in progress, unless there's something in progress going on. But what's happening now is that they are so far out on the limb that they're actually creating crimes so that they can justify their presence on these sites and fueled by money and power politics. That's what they're actually doing. And if you understand it that way, then you understand that certain guardrails have to be put up to allow police to do investigations at the same time to prevent them from violating your rights. Because we have this schizophrenia about sex where at once we claim that we revile, pornography and fantasy games and things like that. At the same time, that many of the people who claim that they despise this are openly engaged in it or quietly engaged in it and secretly love it. So we really have to get to a point where we have made our peace on this and we really figure out, are we helping children here? Because you have many people who have, despite their convictions, managed ultimately to get a job only to have somebody walk in with a picture of them from the sex offender registry or who call up and they all claim in doing this, they call up and say, oh, do you know who this person is? They all claim in doing this that they are somehow safeguarding children, they're protecting the public, and they're letting people know. Well, how is that helping exactly? How is that helping? You're already on a public registry in many of these cases. So, how is that helping? Or is it grandstanding? Is it getting on a bandwagon? Is it public shaming for the purpose of public shaming? So that you can be the one to point the finger and look virtuous and say, oh, look what I found. Where does that benefit anybody? How does that help anybody at any time do anything? You know, you can claim it protects somebody, but that's just supposition. That's just a guess. Because unless you caught somebody in the in the process of doing something, then you didn't do anything for anybody. You didn't help anybody. And that's what police are claiming too, that but for their presence, this would have been all a terrible disaster. I was reading an article that I had put in my favorites, and the title of the article was "Police Nab 8 Creeps," and then colon sheriff. So presumably the sheriff said this. I clicked on the woman's name for the byline, and of course, there's no way to contact her. So this is in the local patch rag, which is really a rag, and is happy to report these things, but it never ever reports anything from the standpoint of somebody who's actually stung. And the reason is, of course, as I said, if you're facing trial, you can't be out there talking about it. So you're effectively in handcuffs and with tape over your mouth already. And you already look guilty because, as the public will never be reminded, you aren't getting your day in the sun. You're not getting to tell your side of the story in there. And of course, they never come back and interview somebody like me or somebody who's been nailed on this and really look at it. Um, Nor does the public particularly pay attention to various databases around where police and others commit far worse crimes. I was looking over the police database at Bowling Green State University, and there's a stunning number of people here in Virginia who are or were police officers who were quietly allowed to resign or who were allowed to retire, and they spent or there's one case in particular for sodomy, forced sodomy, forced sex onto somebody, and you got 1 month in jail. 1 month in jail. And in many of these cases, too, people go off and they're hired by another police department later on. We've already seen in hard to fill locales like Alaska, almost the entire police force is actually has felonies. So this moral pearl clutching that people get involved in, they have no idea that the real baddies are actually people with badges, actually with a real auctoritas, real authority given to them by the state to actually go after people. And if they knew that, maybe they wouldn't be so focused on trying to get a registry for people who didn't really have any contact with people, nor did they intend to, but they'd actually be focused on where a lot of the problem really lies. Well, with that, this 10th day of December 2024, this is ICAC Unpacked. I'm Norman Michaelation. Look for part two of my series on Tim Ballard and OUR, the police grooming techniques of the sort that get you on the registry, like I just talked about. Part two, probably, if I can get to it this weekend, I will. Otherwise, next week. And have a good evening.